night sky twinkled with stars, casting a soft glow over the secluded lovers' lane. Emma and Jake nestled comfortably in their car, excitement swirling between them like the gentle breeze outside. A warmth of the evening wrapped around them, creating the perfect backdrop for shared dreams and whispered secrets. Emma's laughter danced through the air as she recounted a silly story from their high school day. Jake watched her, mesmerized by the way her eyes sparkled with joy. Each laugh was a melody, each smile a reason to hope. They talked about their future, painting pictures of adventures they wished to embark on, cities they longed to explore, and hopes they dared to dream. They settled into a quiet moment. The soft hum of the radio filled the car, punctuating the serenity with a sudden urgency. A voice of the dispatcher crackled through the static, bringing with it an unsettling news report. A killer was on the loose, a figure cloaked in darkness and rumors, known for a chilling signature, a hook for a hand. The dispatcher spoke of the nearby area, detailing recent disappearances with a coldness that slowly seeped into Emma and Jake's hearts. The thrill of the night began to fade, replaced by an icy tendril of fear that unfurled in the pit of their stomachs. Jake's grip on the steering wheel tightened, his breath coming in shallow bursts. He felt a shiver race down his spine as the stories he had dismissed as mere folklore came crashing down like a wave. Emma noticed the change in his demeanor, her curiosity now mingling with concern. Just as his pale face reflected the glow of the radio, fear etching itself into his features. Hatcher continued, warning the public to stay vigilant, to lock their doors and keep their loved ones close. With each word, the shadows beyond the car seemed to thicken, wrapping around them like an unseen predator lying in wait. Emma, sensing the tension suffocating the air, tried to dismiss the fear that had taken root in Jake's mind. Soothingly, her voice a gentle nightfall that sought to envelop him in warmth. Unease grew, fluttering like a trapped bird in his chest. The tales of the hook seemed all too real now, and he felt an uncontrollable urge to flee from the ominous darkness that surrounded them. That moment, the air was charged with uncertainty as they exchanged glances filled with unspoken fears. Emma reached out to touch Jake's arm, her fingers brushing against his skin, grounding him momentarily. A tension hung like a heavy fog around them, filled with the impending weight of their decision. Jake's heart raced as he contemplated their next move. He wanted to protect Emma, yet the fear clawed at his resolve, pulling him further into its grasp. He glanced into the shadows beyond the car, sensing the presence of something sinister lurking just out of sight. Despite Emma's brave front, her heart mirrored Jake's anxious rhythm. He nodded, feeling his urgency seep into her bones. Together, they decided it was time to leave this place that had felt so warm just moments ago. The cozy atmosphere had morphed into something darker, something that whispered of lurking dangers just beyond their perception. A final glance at the starlit night, a bittersweet farewell to the innocence of the evening. They started the engine. The familiar hum of their vehicle felt like an anchor against the tide of fear. With every turn away from Lover's Lane, their minds raced with unanswered questions, their hearts pounding a frantic rhythm as the shadows closed in behind them. The road ahead stretched into uncertainty, leaving behind what had been a perfect evening and heralding the arrival of an unsettling reality that was only beginning to unfold. Emma and Jake lingered in the fading light of their evening together. A sudden stillness consumed the night air. A laughter that had previously filled their car seemed to evaporate, replaced by an unshakable tension. Emma's heart raced both from the sweetness of their shared moments and the sudden weight of the chilling radio broadcast. Jake, his brow furrowed in concern, glanced out into the encroaching darkness beyond the windshield. Shadows danced against the backdrop of tall trees, and the soft rustle of leaves whispered secrets they dared not unravel. He felt an urge to dismiss the dispatcher's warnings, but each word replayed in their minds like an ominous echo, igniting a spark of fear between them. Tempting to soothe the growing unease, Emma reached for his hand, reminded Jake of their love, their plans, and how precious this night was meant to be. The warmth of her touch could only momentarily hold back the storm of Jake's growing apprehension. He stared into the shadows with wide eyes, imagining the figure lurking just beyond the reach of light, a predator waiting in the night. With every second that ticked by, an inexplicable sense of danger tightened its grip around them. The atmosphere was thick with anxiety, and in that moment, Jake couldn't fight the urge any longer. He suggested they leave, his voice trembling as uncertainty took the helm of his thoughts. Emma hesitated, wanting to reassure him that they were fine. Yet, she sensed the urgency wrapped in his tone, something primal stirring within him. Eyeing, she finally nodded in agreement. They needed to step away from this oppressive aura, even if it meant leaving the sanctuary of their car. Rolling the engine to life, the soft purr resonated through the night, momentarily dispelling the eerie silence. They pulled away from Lover's Lane. The trees seemed to reach toward them like skeletal fingers bound to the shadows. For a fleeting moment, Emma wished they could simply laugh this haunting tale away, revel in their love, and forget the spine-chilling story that had just interrupted their blissful evening. But then came the sound of faint scratching, like nails against metal, through the tension, sending jolts of fear racing through both their veins. Emma's heart drummed loudly in her chest as they exchanged frightened glances, unsure what to make of the interruption. Jake, driven by instinct, stopped the car abruptly. A scratching persisted, echoing through the stillness as if taunting them. With trepidation, Jake exited the vehicle, each step crunching softly against the gravel driveway. Emma watched, her breath catching in her throat as the darkness enveloped him. "Stay here," he muttered, his voice barely above a whisper as he peered into the shadows. A night concealed the terrors lurking just beyond. Every instinct screamed for them to flee, yet Jake felt compelled to confront the source of the disquiet. Emma sat stiffly in her seat, her eyes darting between the growing shadows and Jake's silhouette, hoping he'd find reassurance. Minutes felt like hours as anxiety danced upon her skin. Finally, Jake returned, shaking his head. "Nothing here," he said, though his face betrayed a flicker of doubt. With hearts pounding like thunder in their ears, they drove off, the rhythmic thump of tires against the road offering little comfort. The shadows shrank behind them, yet fear had woven itself into the fabric of the evening. They were free from the palpable dread of Lover's Lane, but the haunting stories continued to pursue them. They arrived at Emma's home. The weight on their shoulders lightened slightly, but the air still held a trace of trepidation. They exchanged nervous chuckles as they stepped out of the car, attempting to shake off the horror of the night, yet an unshakable feeling lingered. Under the comforting glow of the porch light, Emma walked toward her threshold, her heart feeling heavy with a mixture of love and apprehension for Jake. He lingered behind for just a moment, drawn by a tingling discomfort that refused to dissipate. And for Emma to unlock the door, Jake caught something out of the corner of his eye, a glimmer. The porch light reflected a metallic shine that sent icy fingers crawling up his spine. He turned slowly, dread pooling in the pit of his stomach as he stepped closer. Lay innocently on the ground, illuminated in the soft glow a hook, glistening ominously as if it had just emerged from the very depths of their nightmare. Panic washed over him, a chill sweeping through the air, binding his heart in a vice grip of terror. The urban legend echoed violently in his mind, each word a ghostly reminder of the danger they had let go. Jake's pulse raced as realization dawned upon him. The hook was not merely a legend, it was a cruel reality. Disoriented, he glanced toward the open door, knowing Emma was just inside, blissfully unaware of the chilling truth that now loomed at their doorstep. Emma and Jake drove away from Lover's Lane. The darkness around them deepened, swallowing the light of their momentary refuge. The night seemed to stretch endlessly, their breaths echoing within the confines of the car, punctuated by the rhythmic sound of the tires against the pavement. Each mile they traversed, they attempted to brush off the tension that had woven itself into the fabric of the evening, a futile effort against the dread that clung to them like a second skin. A radio cracked with static, serving as an unwelcome reminder of the chilling broadcast they had just fled. The voice of the dispatcher faded in and out, narrating the search for the killer, a figure with a horrifying reputation. Emma turned the dial, desperate to find a distraction to drown out the fear, but the voice remained insistent, a haunting echo reverberating in the background. Jake kept glancing into the rearview mirror, half expecting to catch a glimpse of something sinister pursuing them. Anxiety coiled tightly within him, each breath filled with thoughts of the legend, images of the hook wielded by a shadowy figure lurking just out of view. Emma noticed Jake's unease, and as they approached her home, she allowed a soft smile to form, hoping to dispel his worry. Parked and entered the house, the sharp sting of reality started to dull the horror of the night. A familiar scent of home enveloped them, a comforting blanket after the chilling embrace of the darkness outside. They exchanged nervous laughter, attempting to recapture the joy they had lost. They shared sweet words, reminiscing about their earlier moments, the laughter echoing in the corners of the dimly lit room. "Just a story, right?" Emma whispered, half to herself, trying to convince them both. Jake nodded, though his heart remained heavy with an unshakable fear that lingered, refusing to be concerned only by whispered legends of a distant past. Used herself, slipping inside with the hope of removing the tension that clung to them both. Jake lingered outside on the porch. The silence enveloped him, interrupted only by the soft chirping of crickets. Shadows danced and flickered in the distant streetlights, stretching their limbs like those of creatures waiting to break free from the stillness. Alone, Jake felt the unease settle more deeply. He scanned the areas obscured by darkness just beyond his field of vision, the night's calm deceptive. That something caught his eye, a glimmer, sharp and unnatural, reflecting in the porch light. Flashed momentarily, sending icy tendrils of dread spiraling through him. Deep breath quivered through his chest as he approached the light, each step weighing heavier with the anticipation of what lay ahead. Was this a figment of his imagination, a fragment of the fear that had tainted their evening? He steeled himself, trying to dismiss the creeping worry that grew louder with each passing moment. He reached the edge of the porch. His gaze fell upon it, a hook, gleaming ominously in the soft light. His heart thundered in his chest, and in that instant, the tales he had dismissed so easily became stark reality, encasing him in a chill that was far worse than the night itself. Jake's mind raced as the implications settled into his bones. The urban legend was not just folklore whispered among friends. It was real, and somehow, it had found its way to them, to the very doorstep where they had hoped to find safety. The echo of Emma's laughter faded from his mind, replaced instead by a scream that shattered the silence of the night. It threw him like glass, a shriek filled with terror resounding from inside the house. The air was suddenly thick with urgency. That moment, the world around him narrowed, focus tightening as he turned on his heel, sprinting toward the open door. The terror that had clung to the edges of their evening erupted into a full-blown nightmare. The realization dawned on him that the very danger they had tried to escape was now closing in, threatening to shatter their fragile world of love into a million terrifying shards. He stepped inside, everything shifted, the air thick with dread. The shadows crept closer, and the whispers of urban legends became a harrowing reminder that in the darkest corners of innocence, danger lurked, waiting to strike. The tension in the air felt electric, pulsing with the primal fear that Jake had fought so hard to shake off. His heart raced uncontrollably as he crouched near the door, staring at the sinister object that had turned a night filled with laughter into one shrouded in dread. The reality of the hook settled into his gut, panic settled in deeper. The stories they had brushed off as mere tales of caution suddenly became horrifying truth. Edges glinted under the porch light, reminiscent of the legend that had haunted their evening, and Jake felt the world around him blur. His mind raced through a labyrinth of thoughts, each more alarming than the last. Where it come from? Was it merely a cruel coincidence or a sign that they were not alone, that the darkness they had fled from still clung to the corners of their lives? Jake's attention snapped back to the open door. Emma, his beloved Emma, stood inside at the threshold, her back to him as she fiddled with the lock, blissfully unaware of the nightmare that awaited. Each second stretched painfully, a silent plea for her to sense the danger lurking just outside. Then he heard a blood-curdling scream that sliced through the night, echoing from deep within the house. Emma's voice, filled with terror, shot through him like a bolt of lightning. Time froze, and in an instinctual rush, Jake surged forward, grabbing the hook from the ground. The cold metal felt like an anchor, allowing him to channel his fear into action. Door. He burst inside, adrenaline coursing through his veins, his heart pounding in rhythm with the urgency of the moment. "Emma," he shouted, his voice breaking through the silence that had replaced their earlier laughter. He dashed down the dimly lit hallway, fear clawing at his insides. Emma's scream had been one of pure terror, not just surprise or fright. It was in danger. He reached the living room. He found Emma standing frozen, her eyes wide with horror. In front of her stood the stranger, the very figure that had haunted their night at Lover's Lane. He was cloaked in shadows, his features obscured, but the hook glistened in his hand, a menacing promise of violence. Jake's heart sank. This was not just an urban legend. Panic surged through him as he weighed the odds, knowing they were about to confront a terror that would change everything. Emma backed away, the fear radiating from her like heat, her breathing ragged as she kept her gaze locked on the intruder. Every instinct screamed at Jake to protect her, to shield her from the threat that now loomed over them. Gripping the hook tightly, he positioned himself between Emma and the stranger, fear transforming into fierce determination. A weight of their shared laughter, their dreams, and their love drove him forward, demanding that he face this unimaginable threat. That moment, the unthinkable revelation erupted from Jake's core. This was a battle not just for survival, but for their love. Love that needed to withstand even the darkest of nights. A world outside may have shrouded them in fear, but inside these four walls, as long as they stood together, they could fight for what mattered most. Then, as if sensing the shift in the atmosphere, the stranger took a step closer, the glimmering hook raised and ready, the embodiment of their worst nightmare. Jake's pulse thundered in his ears as he braced himself for the fight of their lives, the very essence of the stories they had laughed off now turning into their reality. With a burning resolve, Jake steeled himself, ready to confront the lurking terror that had invaded their sanctuary, ready to fight for their future. Emma's safety became the only truth in this nightmare, and together, in the face of danger, they would rise to embrace the challenge. Atmosphere inside the house felt suffocating, a heavy blanket of fear enveloping Jake as he rushed through the doorway. The glow of the porch light faded behind him, swallowed by the oppressive shadows that seemed to thicken with every frantic heartbeat. Emma's scream had resonated through the air, pulling him forward with an urgency that smothered any rational thought. He burst into the living room, his eyes frantically scanning the space for any sign of Emma. Familiar surroundings were now distorted by panic. The flickering light bulbs overhead cast eerie, dancing shadows across the walls, creating a labyrinth of darkness where danger could hide undetected. Jake called out Emma's name, but his voice was swallowed by the deafening silence that settled around him. A fear coiled in his gut, instinct driving him to search every corner of their sanctuary. Panic heightened as he noticed the front door had swung wide open, the night air pouring in like a silent intruder. The wind brushed against his face, sending shivers down his spine, as if the night was beckoning him back into its depth. He stepped cautiously through the living room, his heart pounding an urgent rhythm, each beat resonating with the knowledge that something was very, very wrong. Just moments ago, they had shared laughter and warmth, but now the remnants of that comfort had been stripped away, replaced by a haunting void. Jake moved towards the kitchen, the echoes of Emma's laughter playing tricks on his mind, morphing into cries of distress. Rustling caught his attention, drawing him deeper into the house. The tension twisted knots in his stomach, as every shadow felt like a potential threat ready to pounce. He pushed through the kitchen door, searching for any sign of Emma, but the world around him stood quiet, too quiet. Chill settled over him, teasing at the edges of his apprehension. He moved further into the kitchen. A flash of movement at the corner of his eye sent him reeling backward, heart in his throat. That instant, Harry, their loyal golden retriever, bounded into view, his tail wagging as though nothing were amiss. washed over Jake as he lowered himself to embrace his furry companion, the dog's innocence grounding him amid the chaos. The moment was fleeting, Emma's absence that weighed heavily on his heart. "Emma," he called out again, desperation threading through his voice. His feet moved as if of their own volition, guiding him toward the staircase that led to the second floor. A familiar creak of the wooden steps sounded like a warning. Each step felt heavier, laden with dread as he ascended the staircase. It was cast by the dimly lit bulbs twisted unnaturally upon the walls, reminding him of the urban legend that had haunted their evening. The top of the stairs, Jake's pulse quickened even more. He hesitated as he reached the door to their bedroom, a most intimate space now tainted by fear. A door stood ajar, groaning softly as a gust of wind pushed through, as if inviting him to enter. In breath, he pushed the door open, and the sight before him was surreal, a stark contrast to the affection they had shared just hours before. The eerie silence, his heart sank as he spotted a shadow flicker near the window. "Emma," Jake whispered, fear clawing at his throat. Whimper echoed back, followed by a soft sob that twisted painfully in his gut. There, sprawled by the bed, was Emma. He looked terrified, huddled against the wall with wide eyes that seemed to reflect her fear. Jake rushed forward, instinctively protecting her, desperate to shield her from whatever horror had invaded their home. "Are you okay?" he asked urgently, his heart heavy with dread as he knelt beside her. Emma nodded, tears glistening on her cheeks, but the grip of terror had left her breathless. He pointed towards the window, her voice trembling as she whispered about someone she had seen lurking outside. The air grew thick with an unshakable reality. Jake followed her gaze, his heart racing as every instinct screamed at him to act. Still in the dark shadows beyond the window, the embodiment of the grotesque legend that had haunted them all night long. With every beat of his heart, Jake felt the weight of their ordeal bearing down, threatening to engulf them both. "Stay here," Jake commanded softly, holding onto the remnants of his courage. He rose to his feet, scanning the room before heading towards the window. He peered through the glass. The night was vast and unrelenting, leaving only unanswered questions circling in his mind. Light from a distant street lamp illuminated the sidewalk, but the presence of that lurking figure had dissipated, as if it had melted into the darkness. Jake's instincts urged him to remain vigilant, his heart thumping in time with the realization that the danger had not vanished, but was merely out of sight. He turned to Emma, whose frightened gaze met his, and in that moment, they shared an understanding, a bond forged through the trials they had faced together. The nightmares they had encountered tonight would not break them. They would face whatever was out there together. As he approached her, shadows around them stirred, and somewhere in the depths of the night, the myth of the hook began to transform into a different kind of reality, a haunting reminder that sometimes truths lay hidden beyond the edges of light and darkness, merges with the very essence of their lives. Together, they stood at the threshold of fear and love, knowing that the real test lay not just in the stories whispered around campfires, but in their unyielding courage to face the lurking terror that threatened to tear them apart. In the shadows, they would find strength, and as they clung to each other, hope flickered dimly, a soft glow against the darkness that surrounded them. The porch light flickered like a hesitant star that didn't quite want to shine, casting long shadows that stretched into the darkness, and Jake's heart raced relentlessly against his ribcage. A metallic glimmer of the hook lay ominously by his feet, an unwelcome reminder of the chilling legend they had tried so hard to shake off, yet now it severed through the veil of their sanctuary. Inside, the familiar comfort of Emma's home felt a world away from the terror that loomed on the other side of the doorway. Each heartbeat echoed in Jake's ears, amplifying the haunting scream of Emma that still reverberated in his mind. He gripped the hook tightly, cold metal sending chilling shivers down his spine as he felt its jagged edges slice into his determination. Just an object, it had become a symbol of fight, a desperate plea for survival. Breathlessly, Jake stepped into the dim hallway, his mind racing through scenarios as he navigated the shadows that seemed to cling maliciously to the walls. He He could feel the oppressive atmosphere thickening around him, the air weighed down with dread. Emma was inside, and every instinct urged him to reach her, to shield her from the darkness that danced just out of view. He burst into the living room, his eyes locked onto Emma, frozen in horror as she faced the stranger before her. Time stood still, stretching into an agonizing silence as Jake's heart sank deep into despair. The figure before them was cloaked in an aura of menace, the very embodiment of the stories that haunted urban legends, the hook glistening ominously in the figure's grasp, a stark contrast against the warm hues of the room. Jake's breath caught in his throat, fear intertwining with a sudden surge of rage and protectiveness that ignited within him. Emma, his sweet Emma, stood transfixed, her wide eyes reflecting the fear that coursed through the air like an electric current. No idea of the danger that lurked in the shadows, yet Jake could sense the stranger's intentions dark and sinister. Positioning himself between Emma and the intruder, Jake steadied his breathing, channeling every ounce of fear into unwavering determination. A love they shared surged through him, a beacon of light in the stifling darkness. A laughter, the dreams, the tenderness of their moments each formed a shield around them, reminding him what he was fighting for. Stranger stepping forward, the tension snapped like a taut wire. Jake felt the need to act, to protect, to show Emma that they were not mere characters in a horror tale, but players in their own destiny. He grit his teeth, his grip tightening around the hook, feeling the cold steel against his skin, a weapon forged in fear but wielded with love. Day back, Jake's voice emerged, fierce yet steady, echoing with resolve, slicing through the thick silence of the room. He felt the air thicken with palpable fear, but within it shone the strength of his commitment to Emma. A stranger's eyes glimmered with an unsettling amusement, the hook still poised in striking readiness, but Jake refused to be cowed. Every instinct screamed at him to act, to fight against the chill of the unknown, to protect the sanctuary that was their relationship. That moment, the heart of their love spurred him on, igniting a fire within, forcing him to confront the terror that sought to invade their haven. Emma, sensing his determination, trembled but remained steadfast, her presence like an anchor grounding him amidst the storm. In her eyes, he saw a reflection of the love they built, fragile yet fierce, and it urged him to stand firm. Together they would face the shadow, whatever it may be. The stranger took another menacing step. Jake's heart thundered with urgency. A primal call to arms surged through him. This was a battle, no longer merely a nightmare spawned from urban legends. It was their reality. The streets outside faded away, and they remained poised against the encroaching darkness, armed with nothing but love and desperation to protect it. That moment, under the oppressive weight of fear, Jake knew they were not powerless victims of fate. They were warriors in their own story, ready to rise against the lurking terror that threatened to tear them apart. Together, in the face of adversity, they would fight as one, prepared to confront whatever was to come, an unbreakable bond anchored in love and resilience. The echoes of Emma's scream faded into the stillness of the night. Jake felt time stretch around him, amplifying the urgency that coursed through his veins. Panic surged as he stood at the entrance of their home, the door wide open, an invitation to an unseen predator lurking just beyond the threshold. A hook, now chillingly real, lay at his feet, a cruel remnant of the urban legend they had tried to dismiss. Instinctively clutching the metal object, he raced through the darkness, his heart drumming an erratic rhythm in his chest. Each step felt like a countdown to a moment he dreaded. The shadows danced mockingly, just out of reach of the soft glow from the street lamp outside. The familiar walls of their home now felt foreign and suffocating. The sanctuary turned into a prison of fear. Emma, he shouted, his voice echoing into the abyss, swallowed by the void of dread that filled the air. There was no answer, only the haunting silence that wrapped around him like a suffocating shroud. A living room held nothing but shadows, twisting and turning under the flickering lights. Jake's breath quickened, and every sense heightened. He dashed towards the kitchen, every instinct thrumming with the memory of Emma's terrified face. Tension in the air was palpable, a weight pressing down on him as he searched every corner, every familiar nook that now seemed to shroud danger. He rounded the corner into the kitchen. A sound caught his attention, a scurrying beneath the table made his heart leap. For an instant, he prepared to confront whatever awaited him, but relief flooded through him as he saw Harry, their golden retriever, bounding into view, blissfully unaware of the night's horrors. "Harry, where's Emma?" Jake's words were a desperate whisper, his pulse resuming its frantic course. Wagging tail was a brief reminder of normalcy in the chaos of the night, but it only served to heighten Jake's anxiety. Emerald eyes scanned the room in search of his beloved. "Emma," he cried again, a scream tearfully echoing off the well-worn walls. A silence returned, weighing heavier than before, and a sense of urgency surged through him, compelling him to search further. Following the instinct to check upstairs, Jake made his way to the staircase. A wood creaked beneath his weight, an eerie sound in the stillness that felt almost like a warning. He climbed each step cautiously, feeling the dread constricting around him. At the top, the hallway stretched before him, its shadows yawning wide like a mouth ready to swallow him whole. Emma's bedroom door stood ajar, a faint light spilling through the gap, yet the warmth it promised was tainted with uncertainty. Pushing the door open, Jake's breath caught in his throat at the sight that met him. There, huddled against the wall near their bed, was Emma. She looked paler than he'd ever seen her, wide eyes reflecting a mix of fear and disbelief as tears glistened on her cheeks. "Jake," she whispered, a tremor in her voice that sent chills spiraling down his spine. He rushed to her side, her quivering finger pointed toward the window, her body trembling with fear. "What happened? Are you okay?" Jake knelt beside her, wrapping his arms around her as if his embrace could shield her from whatever horror lurked outside. Her nod felt insufficient against the raw terror etched across her features, and his heart pounded as he followed her gaze to the window. Outside, the night loomed dark and unyielding, but then he saw a glimmer of metal that seemed to flare against the shadows. A sight sent a jolt of fear through him, the hook from earlier, clearly marking their encounter with the nightmarish figure that haunted their thoughts. "Here," he whispered, determination flooding through him. He rose to his feet, heart racing, glancing back at Emma for reassurance before approaching the window. The familiar outlines of their surroundings grew murky under the moonlight, but the sense of danger clung to him, an itch at the back of his mind. Peering closer, Jake felt a primal instinct to act, one that compelled him to protect the love of his life. Yet, as his eyes scanned the outside world, the figure had melted into the shadows, leaving only doubt and uncertainty in its wake. "Gone," Emma's voice trembled behind him, filled with an apprehensive hope that reflected the terror weaving through both of them. Jake turned to her, the bond forged through their shared memories now colliding with the unbearable reality outside their walls. "Don't know," he whispered, stepping back to be closer to her. Connection grounded them against the encroaching darkness, a silent vow to confront whatever threat loomed beyond. "What if it comes back?" she asked, visibly trembling, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Can't get in here." "Not as long as we stick together," he replied, summoning every ounce of courage he possessed. Together they stood on the precipice of fear, a wall against the terror that threatened to break through. They gathered their strength. Jake's mind raced with the implications of the urban legend they thought they had outsmarted. No longer a tale to be dismissed, it was a battle they must face together. The shadows became their adversary, and in that moment, love became their shield. Outside, the night still breathed with mystery, but within these walls, they would find a way to stand resolute. Together, they were unwavering, ready to confront the lurking horror that threatened their love. Routed in fear and bound by courage, they knew as long as they fought together against the lurking terror, hope would flicker like a candle against the endless dark. The air inside the house felt like a living entity, charged with a mixture of dread and urgency as Jake stood poised at the threshold. Settling stillness enveloped him, each tick of the clock amplifying the silence that followed Emma's chilling scream. The warmth of their love, once a comforting presence, felt distant, overshadowed by the palpable fear that gripped the room. Jake's mind raced, images of the night's events flashing through his thoughts like a frenzied montage. After at Lover's Lane, the chilling radio broadcast, the ominous scratching noise, they all converged into this moment where reality morphed into a waking nightmare. He tightened his grip on the hook, cold metal serving as a reminder of the fierce determination surging within it. Emma was inside, vulnerable, and he had no intention of failing her now. He stepped further into the living room, his senses heightened, scanning the dim corners for any movement. Shadows flickered uneasily against the walls, the soft light from a solitary lamp barely illuminating the space where love had thrived just hours before. Fear draped itself over everything like a dark shroud, suffocating joy and laughter under a heavy blanket of dread. Emma, he called out, his voice reverberating against the stillness, desperate to pierce through the silence that had settled around them. The answer he received was an echo, the sound swallowed by the darkness that surrounded him. He strode toward the kitchen, the distance feeling endless, and with each step, dread twisted tighter in his gut. The danger they had run from at Lover's Lane had managed to seep into their sanctuary. Each creak of the floorboards resonated with anxiety, heightening his senses as he pushed through the kitchen door. His breath hitched as he took in the familiar surroundings, a place that had once felt safe now echoed with uncertainty. A flash of movement caught his eye, causing him to freeze. Harry, their loyal golden retriever, bounded into view, tail wagging innocently. Relief washed over him momentarily. Jake dropped to his knees, wrapping his arms around the dog, grounding himself amidst the chaos. But that moment of comfort faded quickly, as he remembered why he had come inside. The urgency of finding Emma surged back. Emma, he called again, and this time the desperation in his voice felt like a plea, a commitment to protect. He darted toward the staircase at the end of the hall, the familiar creak of the wooden steps sounding more like a warning with each footfall. He ascended, shadows twisted unnaturally along the walls, reminding him grimly of the urban legend they had once dismissed. Losing her to the darkness was unthinkable, an ache forming in his chest as he approached their bedroom. A door stood ajar, creaking softly as a breeze pushed through, beckoning him to enter. Pushing the door open, Jake's heart sank as his gaze fell upon Emma. He sat against the wall, her eyes wide and filled with terror, and in that moment, every ounce of his strength surged to confront the looming danger. He rushed to her side, breath less steady than his resolve. "Okay?" he asked urgently, his heart heavy with dread. Her nod was fragile, trembling beneath the weight of fear, and she pointed toward the window, her voice trembling as she whispered about the figure she had seen lurking outside. Every muscle in Jake's body pulsed with a protective instinct as he turned his gaze toward the window. A moonlight bathed the room in an eerie glow, but what lay beyond was shrouded in shadow, equally haunting and elusive. Lay still beside the window, a grim testament to the legend they had tried to escape. "Stay here," he instructed softly, summoning courage as he rose to his feet. A connection they shared anchored him, grounding him against the encroaching terror. He moved closer to the window. Every fiber of his being screamed warnings, cautioning him the threat was not gone, it was merely out of sight. Peering through the glass, Jake's pulse quickened, adrenaline coursing through his veins. The night seemed vast and unrelenting, leaving him with unanswered questions as he strained to see past the curtain of darkness. He turned back to Emma, whose frightened gaze met his, the bond between them fortified by their shared understanding of the danger lurking just beyond. They stood side by side, whispers of fear fading in the overwhelming reality of their love. Face whatever terror awaited them together. The sound a soft rustle outside that snapped Jake's attention back to the window. He tensed, eyes piercing through the veil of night as he spotted the fleeting silhouette retreating into the black. Just beyond the edge of the light, veiled by shadows, but confident in its existence. A fear so primal that it made Jake's heart race. "You need to be careful," Jake whispered, urgency lacing his voice as he placed a protective hand on Emma's shoulder. "I'll keep you safe." Then came a noise soft, shuffling movements resonating at the edge of the house. He felt a chill sweep over him, and instinctively, Jake positioned himself between Emma and the noise, ready to confront whatever danger dared invade their safe space. The moments dragged by. It felt as though time itself stilled, the very air saturated with tension, and the shadows around them seemed to breathe, alive with the menace of the urban legend they couldn't escape. A stranger was no longer just a story, embodied a very real threat to the love they'd fought to protect. And standing firmly together, they braced themselves for the confrontation that was sure to change everything.